Systems Engineer Log, Day 73. Everest Wren, Senior Engineer. Cascade Mountain Defense Complex, Sublevel 7. Time, 14:30 hours. Another day in paradise, as we like to joke down here. 73 days into the monthly maintenance cycle, and I'm starting to remember why I prefer the quarterly rotations. The coffee tastes like filtered rust water, the ventilation system hums like a dying whale, and I've got pressure differentials that don't want to cooperate with 40 years of established baselines. Not that anyone topside cares about pressure differentials. The Cascade Mountain facility houses 847 civilian contractors and 23 military personnel across 12 sublevels carved into solid granite. It's a marvel of 1980s engineering, built to withstand direct nuclear impact and keep America's brightest minds safe while they rebuild civilization. At least, that's what the orientation videos claim. Most days, it feels like an elaborate underground office building with really thick walls and no windows. Today's anomalies started in Section C12, one of the abandoned storage areas on Sublevel 9. The atmospheric pressure readings came back 0.3% off baseline, not enough to trigger automatic protocols, but enough to make my engineer brain itch. In a facility where everything is measured to 3 decimal places, 0.3% might as well be a klaxon alarm. I made my way down through the central shaft, past the hydroponics labs and the machine shops, to the lower storage sections. The elevator descended with its familiar mechanical wheeze, and I found myself humming along to the rhythm. 15 years in this mountain, and you develop relationships with the machinery. Every sound tells a story. Section C, 12 sits at the end of a corridor lined with blast doors, each one sealed with red warning tape and authorized personnel only stickers that have been there since construction. The area was originally designed for long-term equipment storage, but budget cuts in the 90s left it mostly empty. Perfect place for pressure anomalies to hide. My handheld diagnostic unit confirmed the readings. Atmospheric pressure 14.2 psi instead of the standard 14.696. Temperature holding steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity normal. No detectable gas leaks, no structural damage visible to the naked eye. Just wrong numbers. Probably the sensors, I muttered, making notes on my tablet. 40-year-old equipment acting its age. But as I stood there in the dim emergency lighting, something felt off beyond the numbers. The air moved differently, subtle shifts that suggested airflow patterns that shouldn't exist in a sealed storage area. I held up my hand, feeling for drafts, and caught the faintest whisper of air movement coming from the direction of the far wall. Curious, I approached the back corner where storage shelves met solid granite. The wall looked identical to every other wall in the complex. Reinforced concrete with embedded steel mesh, painted institutional gray, and marked with construction codes from 1983. But when I pressed my ear against it, I could swear I heard something. A sound like distant water, or whine through a very narrow space. "Wren to Engineering Central," I radioed. "I'm getting unusual acoustic readings in Section C12. Requesting geological survey reports for this area." "Copy that, Wren. Transmitting historical data now." While I waited for the files to download, I continued my examination. The construction codes indicated this wall backed up against the mountain's natural granite face, solid rock that extended hundreds of feet in every direction. No cavities, no natural formations, nothing that should create air movement or acoustic anomalies. My tablet chimed with the geological survey data. According to the 1981 site assessment, this section of the mountain was geologically stable, with no natural void spaces detected within 200 feet of construction boundaries. The boring samples showed consistent granite composition with typical mineral variation. All perfectly normal. All perfectly documented. All perfectly wrong, if my ears were correct about that sound. I spent another 30 minutes running diagnostics, checking wall thickness with an ultrasonic meter, and documenting everything with digital photos. The pressure differential remained constant. The acoustic anomaly persisted, not loud enough to record properly, but present enough to make me uncomfortable. By the time I returned to my office on Sublevel 7, the day shift was ending. The corridors filled with the familiar sounds of shift change. Conversations echoing off concrete walls, elevator doors chiming, the distant hum of the cafeteria ventilation system preparing for dinner service. I settled at my desk and pulled up the day's system reports. Along with my pressure anomaly, I had notifications from 3 other departments. Sylvan Reed in Communications reported intermittent radio interference patterns, source undetermined, affecting the lower-level emergency channels. Duration, approximately 6 hours, coinciding with my pressure readings. The Lyra Sky from Security logged minor motion sensor inconsistencies in levels 8 to 10, possibly requiring calibration. The glitches occurred in areas adjacent to Section C12. And Corin Nash, our consulting geologist, had filed a routine seismic monitoring report noting minor vibration patterns inconsistent with established geological baselines. The patterns registered on equipment positioned throughout the lower levels. For different systems, for different anomalies, all occurring in the same general area of the facility. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the data displayed across my 3 monitors. 15 years of maintaining this facility had taught me that coincidences were usually system failures waiting to be diagnosed. But 15 years had also taught me that this mountain held secrets that weren't included in the official documentation. During construction, workers had discovered natural caves in the surrounding area, small voids in the granite that the engineers had sealed with concrete and steel before continuing. The official records mentioned them briefly, categorizing them as minor geological irregularities, successfully mitigated during Phase 2 construction. But workers talked. And after 40 years, workers retired and sometimes shared stories about strange acoustics during construction, about caves that seemed to extend deeper than the surveys indicated, about sections where the concrete never quite cured properly despite multiple attempts. I opened a new log entry and began typing my report. Day 73 Maintenance Assessment, Section C, 12 Anomalies. Multiple system irregularities detected in sublevel 9 storage areas. Pressure differential, acoustic anomalies, seismic variations, and electronic interference all occurring simultaneously in historically stable sectors. Recommend comprehensive structural assessment and equipment calibration review. Request permission to access original construction records, including sealed geological survey data. Priority moderate. Systems functioning within acceptable parameters, but pattern suggests potential infrastructure deterioration requiring proactive maintenance. Note, we'll continue monitoring. Something about these readings doesn't feel like normal equipment aging. I paused before adding that last line. In 15 years of engineering reports, I'd never included my feelings in official documentation. Engineers dealt with facts, measurements, quantifiable data. But something about today's discoveries made my professional instincts itch. Before I could second-guess myself, I submitted the report and shut down my workstation. Tomorrow I'd dive deeper into the construction records, maybe bring Corin down to take a look at the geological aspects. For tonight, I wanted dinner and a good night's sleep. But as I walked through the corridors toward my quarters, I found myself listening to the facility's normal sounds with new attention. The ventilation system's constant whisper, the distant hum of the reactor's cooling systems, the subtle vibrations of hundreds of people living and working in an artificial environment. And underneath it all, barely perceptible, something that might have been my imagination. The sound of air moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. Engineering log, personal note. Tomorrow I'll check the construction records. Tonight, I'll try not to think about how many tons of rock sit between us and the surface, or about the sealed caves that the builders discovered 40 years ago. Probably just old equipment acting up. Probably. Day 75, system anomalies multiplying. Cascade Mountain Defense Complex, Sublevel 7. Systems Engineer Log, Everest Wren. The coffee tastes like metal this morning. I've been telling myself it's the water recycling system acting up again, but Nayla ran 3 separate purity tests yesterday. All came back clean. Still tastes like I'm drinking liquid pennies. Started my shift at 0600 with yesterday's anomaly reports spread across my workstation. What I'd dismissed as isolated incidents on day 73 now looked different under systematic analysis. The pressure differentials aren't random. They're appearing in a pattern that follows the old construction grid lines. Section C, 12, 0.3% deviation, 1432 hours. Section D, 8, 0.3% deviation, 1447 hours. Section E, 15, 0.3% deviation, 1503 hours. 15-minute intervals. Moving in a straight line through areas that haven't housed personnel in over a decade. Equipment doesn't fail in geometric patterns. I pulled Sylvan into conference room 3 around 0800 to compare notes. She'd been tracking the radio interference I'd been hearing reports about. Turns out it's not interference. It's coordination. "Look at this," she said, spreading printouts across the metal table. Static analysis graphs, frequency measurements, timestamps. The signals aren't random electromagnetic noise. They're pulsed. Consistent intervals, consistent duration, consistent power output. The patterns matched mine. Same 15-minute intervals, same geometric progression through the facility. Something was systematically testing our infrastructure, and it was doing it with the precision of an engineer. "Sylvan, what's the range on these signals? Are they coming from outside the mountain?" She shook her head, dark hair falling across her face as she leaned over the data. "That's the problem. Signal strength suggests origin point inside the facility. But there's no equipment in those sections that could generate these frequencies." "Equipment malfunction?" "Everest, equipment doesn't malfunction in coordination with other equipment 3 levels away. Not unless there's a central system controlling it all. But there isn't. I designed half these systems myself. I know every circuit, every backup, every redundancy protocol. Nothing connects those sections except the basic infrastructure grid, power, water, air circulation. The air circulation. I spent the next 4 hours in the Environmental Control Center, pulling maintenance logs that go back to facility activation. The ventilation system reaches every corner of this complex, including the abandoned sections. Old Soviet-era design philosophy. Total environmental control means total coverage. What I found made my hands shake enough that I had to set down my coffee cup. Emergency lighting activations in uninhabited sections, always preceded by air pressure fluctuations. Motion sensors triggering in sequences that suggested something moving through the ventilation shafts. Temperature variations in specific ducts that indicated obstruction, then clearing, then obstruction again. Something was using our air system as a highway. I called Delira down to environmental around 1400. She arrived in full security gear, hand resting on her sidearm. 3 months ago, I would have laughed at the paranoia. Today, it felt appropriate. "I need security sweeps of the abandoned sections," I told her, pulling up the environmental anomaly map on the main display. "Focus on these areas here, here, and here. Look for anything that doesn't belong." The Lyra studied the display, her weathered face creased with concentration. 22 years military service, 8 years bunker security. She'd seen everything worth seeing underground. "Everest, my team swept these sections last month during standard rotation. Found nothing but dust and old equipment covers. Look again. Something's down there." She nodded slowly. "I'll take Delta team through after shift change. Full sweep, motion trackers, thermal imaging." She paused, looking at the data more closely. "These patterns, they look almost like patrol routes." That phrase stuck with me through the rest of the day. Patrol routes, as if something was systematically reconnoitering our facility, learning our layout, testing our responses. Around 1800, Corin knocked on my office door. The facility geologist looked haggard, gray beard unkempt, soil samples still staining his work clothes. "Everest, I need to show you something. The seismic readings from yesterday? They're not equipment malfunction." He spread his tablet across my desk, showing me seismic data that looked like a heartbeat monitor during cardiac arrest. Regular pulses, too regular for natural geological activity. These readings are coming from below sublevel 12, 200 feet below our lowest level. Something down there is moving, and it's moving in patterns. Patterns? Systematic excavation, or systematic movement through existing spaces. The vibration signature suggests something large moving through confined areas. His eyes met mine. "Everest, there's nothing down there except solid rock." According to our geological surveys, nothing but granite for 300 feet in any direction. But surveys can be wrong. Construction records can be incomplete. And after 40 years underground, rock shifts, water finds new paths, and spaces that didn't exist during construction can open up. I spent the evening in the archives, pulling original construction documents. What I found buried in Appendix J, 7 of the geological assessment, made my blood run cold. Note: natural cave system detected during initial excavation, depth 47 to 52 feet below proposed foundation level. System extends approximately 400 meters in primary axis, depth and secondary extent unknown. Recommend comprehensive survey before construction proceeds. The survey had never been completed. Construction proceeded on schedule. The caves were sealed with concrete barriers and written off as addressed in the final reports. Sealed. Not filled. Sealed. At 2,247 hours, emergency lighting activated in Section C12. No personnel in the area. No scheduled maintenance. No system failures logged. At 2,251 hours, motion sensors triggered in the main ventilation shaft serving Section C12. Something the size of a person moving through ductwork barely large enough for maintenance access. At 2,254 hours, scratching sounds were reported by residents in quarters block 7. Scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. I'm writing this at 0130, day 76. The coffee still tastes like metal. The scratching sounds are getting louder. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever's down in those sealed caves has been listening to us, learning from us, preparing. The pressure readings are still coming in every 15 minutes. But now they're not just testing our systems. They're mapping our routines. End of log entry. Status report, day 75. Population, 847 civilian contractors, 23 military personnel. System status, 47 minor anomalies reported, 12 under investigation. Environmental status, air quality normal, water recycling 98% efficiency. Security status, enhanced patrols initiated in abandoned sections. Personal assessment, patterns suggest intelligent reconnaissance activity. Recommended actions, complete facility-wide seismic survey. Historical construction document review. Enhanced environmental monitoring. Coordination meeting with all department heads scheduled day 76, 0800 hours. Note: the taste of metal in the water supply may indicate mineral leaching from structural elements under stress. Recommend comprehensive structural integrity assessment. Day 78, comprehensive systems analysis. Cascade Mountain Defense Complex, sublevel 7. Systems engineer log, EREN. The patterns are too coordinated for equipment failure. I've run diagnostics on every sensor array, cross-referenced 40 years of maintenance logs, and analyzed pressure differential data, going back to initial construction. Whatever's happening down here follows rules, but not the rules of aging infrastructure. Corin agreed to help me access the restricted construction files. His geological survey clearance got us into the archives most engineers never see. What we found in the original blueprints made my stomach drop. The Cascade Complex wasn't built on solid rock like we were told. 50 feet below our deepest foundation level, there's a natural cave system. Extensive. The geological surveys from 1985 describe it as a complex network of interconnected caverns extending approximately 2.3 miles in primary diameter, with numerous secondary passages of unknown depth and extent. The caves were sealed during construction, concrete barriers reinforced with steel mesh, designed to prevent any structural compromise to the bunker above. But here's what bothers me. The original engineering notes include a subsection titled Anomalous Geological Formations. It's mostly redacted, but I can make out fragments, unusual mineral deposits, acoustic properties inconsistent with standard limestone, and recommend ongoing seismic monitoring of sealed sections. 40 years of seismic monitoring, and nobody ever mentioned these caves to current staff. Corin pulled up the water table data. The mountain's aquifer system has been shifting for decades, directing groundwater through the sealed cave network. Water and limestone don't play well together over 40 years. Add the thermal dynamics from our reactor's heat exchange system, and you've got perfect conditions for erosion. The barriers could be compromised, Corin said, running calculations on his tablet. Water pressure, thermal expansion, geological stress. It's a perfect storm for structural failure. I asked him what kind of timeline we're looking at. He went quiet for a long moment, staring at the geological surveys. Everest, based on these water flow patterns. I think we're already there. That's when Sylvan found us in the archives. Her communication logs showed something that made the cave system discovery feel like a minor concern. The dead zones in our internal communications, the areas where radio contact becomes impossible, they align perfectly with the sealed cave entry points marked on the construction blueprints. It's not interference, she said, spreading her signal strength maps across the table. It's like something is actively dampening our communications in those specific locations. The pattern's too precise to be natural. We spent 3 hours cross-referencing data, my pressure anomalies, Corin's seismic readings, Sylvan's communication dead zones. Everything points to the same 12 locations throughout the bunker. 12 points where the original caves were sealed. I pulled up the real-time monitoring data from those 12 locations. What I saw made me understand why the night shift security teams have been filing so many unusual noise reports. The seismic signatures aren't random. There's a rhythm to them, like something large moving through confined spaces, following patterns, testing boundaries. The movement signatures are too coordinated to be water flow or geological settling. They're purposeful. Corin confirmed what I was afraid to voice. Something down there is moving. Something big enough to register on our equipment, systematic enough to create coordinated pressure changes, and intelligent enough to avoid our monitoring systems most of the time. We sealed the archive room and agreed to keep this information contained until we could analyze it further. But as we prepared to leave, Sylvan's radio crackled with a message from the Lyra in security. All units, we have confirmed visual contact with unauthorized movement in Section C12. Repeat, visual contact confirmed. Security team responding to investigate. Section C12. The abandoned storage area where our first pressure anomalies were detected 3 days ago. One of the 12 sealed cave entry points. I checked the time, 15:42 hours. In my engineering log, I noted, recommend immediate structural assessment of foundation barriers. Advise all personnel to avoid sections C, 12, D7, and F15 until further notice. But I didn't write what I was really thinking. After 40 years, the seals are failing. And something that's been waiting in the dark is finally finding its way through. The scratching sounds in the walls aren't coming from aging pipes or settling concrete. They're coming from below, and they're getting closer. Technical notes. Pressure anomalies now correlated with cave entry points. Seismic activity shows purposeful movement patterns. Communication dead zones align with geological vulnerabilities. Visual contact reported in Section C12. Structural barrier failure imminent. Next priority, emergency assessment of all 12 sealed locations. Personal note, I've been an engineer for 15 years. I know the difference between system failure and system breach. This is a breach. Day 80 multiple system failures. Cascade Mountain Defense Complex, emergency operations. Systems engineer log, EREN. Everything is falling apart at once. 0347 hours. Main power grid failure in sections A through D. Not a gradual degradation. Simultaneous breaker trips across 4 independent circuits. I ran to the electrical room expecting to find blown transformers or overloaded systems. Instead, I found something that made my hands shake as I wrote the incident report. The main conduits had been opened from the inside. Not damaged, opened. The access panels were intact, but the cable runs showed signs of systematic disconnection. Precise cuts through copper wiring, as if something had crawled through the electrical channels and selectively severed specific connections. The backup generators kicked in automatically, but they're showing stress indicators I've never seen before. Oil pressure fluctuations, temperature spikes, and acoustic signatures that suggest foreign matter in the fuel lines. When I opened the generator housing to investigate, I found organic residue coating the internal components, some kind of translucent, protein-based film that dissolved when exposed to air. 0623 hours, water contamination alert from the filtration plant. Naila called it in personally after 3 residents reported severe nausea and disorientation from this morning's water supply. The filtration sensors detected biological contamination, but the readings don't match any known pathogens in our database. I accompanied Naila to examine the filtration systems. What we found defied explanation. The primary filters were intact, but the water in the holding tanks had been altered. Microscopic analysis showed cellular structures unlike anything in our biological reference materials. Not bacteria, not viruses, something else entirely. Something that seemed to respond to light and electromagnetic fields. "It's not trying to make us sick," Naila said, adjusting the microscope focus. "It's trying to communicate with our nervous systems." 1134 hours, air circulation emergency. The environmental controls detected atmospheric contamination in the ventilation system, airborne particles that triggered every biological hazard sensor simultaneously. But when we traced the contamination source, we found the particles were being deliberately distributed through the ventilation network. Someone, or something, had modified the air circulation patterns. The computer systems showed manual overrides implemented from multiple access points throughout the facility. Override codes that match our security protocols, but were entered from locations that should be physically impossible to access. The Lyra's security teams are overwhelmed. 47 separate incidents in the past 18 hours. Motion sensors triggering in empty rooms, security cameras showing impossible shadows, access doors opening and closing on their own, and now reports of residents experiencing shared dreams about underground spaces. The children are the worst part. They've stopped crying when the lights flicker. They've stopped jumping when the emergency alarms sound. This morning, I found a group of them in the recreation area, drawing identical pictures with their crayons. Dark tunnels filled with moving lights, and human figures walking towards something that hurt my eyes to look at. 1520 hours, communication blackout with Surface Command. Sylvan's been trying to re-establish contact for 6 hours, but every frequency shows active interference. Not atmospheric or equipment failure, but deliberate signal jamming. The jamming patterns are sophisticated, adapting to our communication attempts in real time. "They're learning our protocols," Sylvan reported during the emergency briefing. "Whatever's causing the interference, it's studying our communication methods and countering them systematically." Commander Torres called for immediate evacuation protocols, but the Surface Command override came through 15 minutes later. "Maintain lockdown. Assessment ongoing. No personnel exit authorized. We're trapped down here, and I don't think it's for our safety." 1847 hours. The reactor is acting up. Core temperature fluctuations that shouldn't be possible with our automated systems. The control rods are responding to commands that aren't coming from our control room. When I accessed the reactor's diagnostic systems, I found modification codes embedded in the operating software. Modifications that weren't there yesterday. The reactor isn't malfunctioning. It's being reprogrammed. I confronted Corin about his geological assessment. He's been avoiding the team meetings, spending all his time in the lower monitoring stations. When I finally cornered him near the seismic equipment, he showed me readings that made my blood run cold. "The movement signatures have changed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not random anymore. They're coordinated. And Everest, they're not just in the caves anymore. They're in our walls." The seismic data showed activity patterns throughout the bunker's infrastructure. Movement in the ventilation shafts, vibrations in the electrical conduits, pressure changes in the water pipes. Whatever breached the sealed caves is now using our own systems as transportation networks. They're not trying to break in anymore. They're already here. 2230 hours. Emergency assembly in the main common area. 847 people crammed into a space designed for half that number. Commander Torres tried to maintain order, but the crowd could sense his uncertainty. Conflicting reports, failed containment protocols, and now children exhibiting behavioral changes that have the medical staff genuinely frightened. Naila presented her findings to the assembly. The contamination isn't random. It's systematic. Whatever's in our water and air supply is designed to alter human neurochemistry. We're seeing synchronized behavioral changes, shared sensory experiences, and enhanced electromagnetic sensitivity among affected individuals. She paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from terrified to eerily calm. The affected individuals aren't getting sick. They're evolving. That's when the lights went out. In the darkness, I heard something that will haunt me forever. 847 people breathing in perfect synchronization. And underneath that synchronized breathing, I heard something else. A sound like whispers in a language that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my brainstem. When the emergency lighting activated 30 seconds later, I noticed something that made me understand how desperate our situation had become. The children weren't afraid of the dark anymore. They were smiling. Critical system status. Main power, compromised by internal sabotage. Water supply, biologically contaminated with unknown organisms. Air quality, atmospheric contamination with neurological effects. Communications, jammed by adaptive interference. Reactor, unauthorized modifications to control systems. Population, 30% showing neurological changes. Command assessment, facility security compromised. External evacuation denied. Internal lockdown protocols failing. Personal assessment, we're not dealing with an invasion. We're dealing with an integration. And I don't think we have a choice in the matter. Emergency systems log, Cascade Mountain Defense Complex. Day 82, 3:47 hours. Chief Systems Engineer, Everest Wren. Security level, containment breach. The seismic alarm tore me from 3 hours of restless sleep. Not the steady pulse of equipment malfunction, the rapid, desperate shriek that means the mountain itself is moving. I was pulling on my boots when the emergency lighting bathed sublevel 7 in blood-red shadows. Then came the sound I'd been dreading for 4 days, the deep, resonant clang of blast doors slamming shut throughout the complex. All of them, simultaneously. Protocol dictates that blast doors only activate under 3 conditions: nuclear attack, catastrophic structural failure, or manual override from Surface Command. We hadn't heard from Surface Command in 18 hours. Everest! Sylvan's voice crackled through my personal comm, static heavy. The barriers, all of them, they're gone. I ran through corridors I'd walked for 15 years, now alien under emergency lighting. The usual hum of civilization, air recycling, power distribution, the distant murmur of 847 people living in controlled safety, had been replaced by something else. A vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The command center looked like a war zone. The Lyra hunched over security monitors, her face gray in the screen glow. Corin stood at the geological station, his hands shaking as he tracked seismic readings. Nayla moved between workstations, checking vitals on personnel throughout the complex. "Talk to me," I said, forcing the engineering comm that had carried me through 15 years of crises. "Simultaneous structural failure across all cave entry points," Corin said without looking up. "It's not erosion anymore, Everest. Something coordinated this." The main display showed a cross-section of our complex, 7 levels of reinforced concrete and steel, suspended in granite bedrock. Below us, the cave system we'd thought safely sealed now pulsed with movement indicators. Red dots flowed through passages like blood through arteries, converging on our foundation. "They've been working the barriers from both sides," the Lyra said, her voice hollow. "Inside the electrical conduits, the water pipes, the ventilation shafts. Christ, Everest, they've been inside our walls for days." I pulled up the reactor status. Core temperature stable, but the coolant system showed contamination warnings across all primary loops. Whatever these things were, they'd been studying our most critical systems. "Surface communication?" I asked, though I already knew. "Dead," Sylvan confirmed. "All channels. But I'm getting something else, structured interference patterns. It's not random electromagnetic noise. Something, is actively jamming us." The lights flickered. Not the slow fade of power failure, but a rapid strobing that seemed almost like Morse code. Then the temperature dropped 10 degrees in 30 seconds. Main reactor experiencing controlled shutdown sequence, the automated system announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Coolant contamination detected. Initiating emergency protocols. Contamination with what? I demanded, pulling up the diagnostic screens. The analysis results made no sense. Silicon-based compounds, but arranged in patterns too complex for natural formation. Organic structures that shouldn't exist at these temperatures. And something else, microscopic formations that responded to electrical current like primitive neural networks. Medical bay to command. Nayla's voice came through the comm. We've got 23 people missing from the lower levels. Found 17 of them in the recreational areas, but she paused. They're not responsive. Catatonic, but their brain activity is off the charts. Off the charts how? They're experiencing synchronized REM sleep while completely awake. Whatever's happening to them, they're all experiencing it together. I stared at the geological display, watching the red dots move through the cave system with purpose that looked increasingly like intelligence. Valera, I need security footage from the past 6 hours. Everything. The recordings showed our nightmare in grainy infrared. Shapes moving through ventilation shafts, translucent, flowing like liquid mercury, but with deliberate purpose. They avoided the main corridors, stayed within the infrastructure spaces, studying our electrical systems, our water flow, our air circulation. But in the most recent footage, they'd grown bolder. The camera in Section C, 12 showed one of them, God, what do I even call them, interacting with a computer terminal. Not randomly, but with careful, methodical precision. Learning. They're not trying to kill us, I said, the realization hitting like ice water. They're trying to understand us. Understand us for what? Corin asked. The answer came from the reactor monitoring station. The contaminated coolant wasn't just randomly poisoned, it was being systematically altered. The molecular structures were being reorganized into something that looked almost like a communications array. A beacon. They're using our reactor, I whispered. They're turning it into a transmission device. The implications crashed over me. Our nuclear reactor, designed to power 1,000 people for decades, was being converted into a signal broadcaster. But broadcasting to whom? And why did they need us alive to do it? Another alarm joined the chorus. This one from the surface monitoring systems, the few that still functioned. Seismic activity was spiking across the entire mountain range. Not just here. Everywhere. Nayla, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. The catatonic patients, can they communicate at all? That's the strangest part. They don't respond to external stimuli, but they're talking. All of them. In perfect unison. Same words, same timing, same inflection. What are they saying? A long pause. Then, they're counting down. In a language I don't recognize. The emergency power flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Through the reinforced glass of the command center, moving through the corridor with fluid grace, was one of them. Translucent, roughly humanoid, but wrong in ways that hurt to look at directly. It paused at our door, and I swear it looked right at me. Then it placed something against the glass. Not a hand, more like a pseudopod that flowed into the shape of a palm. The glass began to frost over, but not from cold. From some kind of chemical reaction that turned the transparent barrier into a screen. Symbols appeared in the frost. Not random patterns, but clearly intentional markings. Mathematical equations that made my engineering brain scream in recognition. They were showing us structural stress calculations for our bunker. They know exactly how much pressure this place can take, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The entity moved away, and the frost melted, leaving only the faint chemical smell of ozone and something organic that reminded me of deep caves and geological time. Emergency power at 40%, the automated system announced. Backup generators offline. Estimated operational time, 18 hours. 18 hours. Then the lights would go out, the air would stop circulating, and the blast doors would become our tomb instead of our protection. I looked around the command center at the 4 people who'd become my family over the past week of crisis. The Lyra, whose security protocols had proven useless against an enemy that flowed through our walls like water. Corin, whose geological expertise had warned us but couldn't save us. Sylvan, whose communication skills meant nothing when the thing we needed to talk to thought in silicon and spoke in molecular chemistry. Nayla, whose medical knowledge couldn't treat a condition that might not be a disease at all. And me, whose 15 years of engineering experience had taught me to build walls, generate power, and control systems, none of which mattered when the enemy was already inside and learning our technology faster than we could understand theirs. "They're not killing us," I said again, but this time the words carried a different weight. "They're not killing us because they need us alive. We're not prisoners. We're not even hostages." I stared at the reactor diagnostic, at the beacon they were building with our own nuclear fire. "We're incubators, and I think I know what they're preparing us for." The countdown from the catatonic patients continued, echoing through the medical bay and into our comm system. Numbers in an alien language, but decreasing with mathematical precision. Whatever was coming, we had less than 18 hours to figure out if we were going to fight it, join it, or simply survive it. The mountain trembled again, and this time I could feel the rhythm. Like a heartbeat. Like something vast and ancient finally waking up. Technical status. Main reactor, controlled shutdown, coolant system compromised. Emergency power, 40% capacity, 18 hours remaining. Personnel, 23 missing, 17 catatonic, 807 accounted for. Communication, complete surface blackout, internal systems functional. Containment, complete breach, entities active throughout complex. Threat assessment, intelligence gathering phase, unknown final objective. Next priority, determine entity communication protocols and negotiate survival terms. Personal note, if someone finds this log, know that we tried to follow protocol. We tried to contain the threat, protect the people, maintain the mission. But some threats can't be contained because they're not invasions, they're awakenings. And maybe that's what we should have been preparing for all along. Day 85, Emergency Rationing Protocols. Systems Engineer Log, Everest Wren. Emergency power at 31%. Water reserves contaminated. Food stores showing systematic biological infiltration patterns. We've been forced into pure survival engineering, and I'm starting to understand that everything I learned about crisis management assumed we'd have outside support. We don't. The Leadership Council formed 3 days ago out of necessity rather than protocol. Me for engineering and infrastructure, the Lyra for security coordination, though she's been increasingly erratic since her encounter with them in Sublevel 3. Nayla handles medical triage for the neurological symptoms that are spreading through our population like a slow-acting plague. Corin manages our geological monitoring, trying to predict their movement patterns through the cave systems. Sylvan coordinates what little communication we can maintain between secured sections. 847 people when this started. 721 people accounted for as of this morning's count. The missing aren't dead, we found some of them. They sit in perfect stillness, eyes open, responding to basic stimuli, but unable to form coherent speech. Nayla calls it cognitive suspension. I call it terrifying. The entities, we've stopped pretending we don't know what they are, have evolved their approach over the past 5 days. Initially, they seemed focused on infrastructure mapping, testing our electrical systems and ventilation networks with methodical precision. Now they're studying us directly. Human behavior analysis conducted through manipulation of our environment. Yesterday, they cut power to Section D7 for exactly 43 minutes. Not long enough to cause system failures, but perfectly timed to observe our emergency response protocols. They watched us implement backup lighting, coordinate personnel movement, and establish temporary communication relays. When power returned, our security cameras caught translucent forms retreating through air ducts, forms that moved with liquid fluidity through spaces that should be physically impossible to navigate. They're learning. Fast. Our water situation reached critical yesterday when the main filtration systems showed biological contamination at the molecular level. Not bacterial or viral, something that shouldn't exist according to every biology textbook ever written. Silicon-based organic compounds that seem to interface directly with our nervous systems through skin contact. 5 people who handled contaminated water without protective equipment now exhibit the same cognitive suspension symptoms as the missing. Nayla and I jury-rigged a filtration system using components from the medical bay's dialysis equipment. It's reducing contamination by about 87%, which means each person gets 1 liter of relatively safe water per day. We're supplementing with distilled alcohol from the medical stores and melted ice from the emergency cooling systems. Nobody's complaining about the taste anymore. Food storage presented a different challenge. The entities aren't contaminating our supplies randomly. They're demonstrating sophisticated understanding of human nutrition and psychology. They've targeted comfort foods first: coffee, chocolate, processed snacks. Items that provide psychological rather than purely nutritional value. It's as if they understand that breaking our morale is more effective than starving us. We've consolidated all untainted food stores into the blast-sealed emergency vault in Section A1. Military MREs, canned goods, and protein bars provide roughly 1,400 calories per person daily. Barely adequate for sedentary survival, inadequate for the physical stress of crisis response. People are losing weight, becoming irritable, making poor decisions under cognitive strain. But the children aren't afraid anymore. That observation keeps me awake during my 4-hour sleep cycles. Adults show increasing anxiety, paranoia, and aggressive behavior as resources dwindle and entity encounters intensify. The children, however, have become unnaturally calm. They play quiet games in corners, drawing intricate geometric patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. When asked about the things in the walls, they respond with matter-of-fact acceptance. They're learning about us. We're learning about them. Nayla documented neurological changes in the pediatric population yesterday. Brain activity patterns show synchronization across individuals, something that should be medically impossible. When one child experiences physical pain, others show sympathetic neural responses. They're developing collective awareness while maintaining individual personalities. The adults see invasion. The children see evolution. I've implemented a 3-tier security system using our blast door protocols. Tier 1 encompasses living quarters and essential services, maintained under positive air pressure to prevent entity infiltration through ventilation systems. Tier 2 includes workshops and storage areas, monitored but not continuously occupied. Tier 3 covers damaged sections and cave access points. We've essentially abandoned these areas to entity control. Our early warning system uses seismic monitoring equipment to track entity movement through the geological substrate. Corin calibrated the sensors to detect vibration patterns that correspond to their physical presence. We get roughly 12 minutes advance notice before they enter Tier 2 areas, 4 minutes before Tier 1 penetration attempts. Communication between sections relies on the emergency lighting grid. Sylvan developed a binary code system using controlled power fluctuations. It's slow and limited, but entity interference hasn't figured out how to manipulate our intentional electrical patterns. Yet, the most disturbing development occurred during yesterday's evening meal. Power fluctuations in Section B4 caused our lighting to strobe at 7.83 Hz, a frequency that induces mild seizure activity in some individuals. But instead of random neurological responses, 43 people across different sections began moving in perfect synchronization. Standing, sitting, turning their heads in identical patterns for exactly 97 seconds. When the strobing stopped, they had no memory of the synchronized behavior. Entity communication attempts have become more sophisticated. They've learned to manipulate our electrical systems to create crude pictographic displays on computer monitors. Simple shapes at first: circles, triangles, wave patterns. Yesterday, they managed to display what appeared to be a schematic of our bunker's layout, accurate down to modifications we made after construction. Today, they showed us a star map. I've been an engineer for 22 years. I understand systems, redundancy, failure analysis, and crisis management. But I wasn't trained for first contact with geological intelligence that treats our entire facility as a laboratory and our population as experimental subjects. The hardest part is admitting that resistance might be futile. Not because they're overwhelmingly powerful. They seem more fragile than humans in direct physical confrontation. But because they're patient, methodical, and apparently immortal. They can afford to take decades learning about us. We need food, water, and breathable air every single day. Sylvan proposed attempting direct communication yesterday. Nayla argued for continued medical intervention to reverse the neurological symptoms. The Lyra wants to implement more aggressive security measures, though she couldn't explain what aggressive means against entities that can move through solid rock. I suggested we focus on engineering solutions, modifying our infrastructure to achieve stable coexistence rather than continued conflict. The others stared at me like I'd suggested surrendering to an invading army. Maybe I have. Emergency power at 29%. Reactor coolant showing mineral contamination consistent with entity presence in the reactor chamber. If they're interfering with our nuclear systems, we could be looking at controlled shutdown within 72 hours. No power means no life support, no water filtration, no communication, no security measures. In engineering terms, we're experiencing cascading system failure with no external support for recovery operations. In human terms, we're running out of time to figure out what they want from us. Day 6 of siege. We've learned to work around them, but they're learning faster. The children aren't afraid anymore. That terrifies me more than anything else. End personal log. System status, emergency power 29%. Population, 721 confirmed, 43 exhibiting neurological symptoms. Threat assessment, adaptive intelligence learning exponentially. Recommendation, explore communication protocols before resource depletion forces critical decisions. Emergency log entry, day 89. Systems engineer, Everest Wren. Power status, 23%, emergency reserves only. Population status, 847, 592 active. The blast doors to Section C, 12 haven't opened in 16 hours. Thalira's voice still echoes through the comm system every 30 minutes, the same 3 words, repeated in perfect monotone. Integration proceeding nominally. It doesn't sound like her anymore. The cadence is wrong, like someone reading phonetic pronunciation guides. Sylvan won't look at the communications console. Says the static patterns are giving her migraines, but I know better. She's afraid of what she might hear coming through. We all are. Status report, critical personnel. Security Chief Thalira Sky, missing day 6, presumed entity contact. Geologist Corin Nash, missing day 3, volunteer reconnaissance. Medical Officer Nayla Vex, active, treating 47 symptomatic cases. Communications Specialist Sylvan Reed, active, psychological stress evident. Systems Engineer Everest Wren, active, structural integrity concerns mounting. The children gathered in the main corridor this morning. All 37 of them, standing in perfect rows like they were assembled by some invisible hand. They spoke in unison, not the garbled chorus you'd expect from kids trying to coordinate, but perfect synchronization. Every syllable aligned, every breath timed precisely. The mountain remembers, they said. The mountain dreams. Then they dispersed to their quarters without another word. Nayla's been documenting the neurological symptoms, but her reports read like science fiction. Synchronized brainwave patterns across unconnected individuals. Shared dream imagery with impossible geometric precision. Children drawing identical cave systems they've never seen, complete with geological formations that match Corin's surveys from the restricted archives. Resource assessment, critical shortage. Potable water, 72 hours remaining at current rationing. Food stores, 8 days, assuming no further contamination. Medical supplies, depleted, especially neurological stabilizers. Morale, unquantifiable, trending toward complete breakdown. The worst part isn't the missing people or the failing systems. It's the choices we're being forced to make. This morning, Marcus Chin, good man, electronics technician, father of 2, came to me with tears in his eyes. His wife started showing symptoms yesterday. The synchronized breathing, the 1,000-yard stare, the way she tilts her head like she's listening to frequencies the rest of US can't hear. She's still in there, he whispered. I can see her sometimes, behind her eyes. But they're changing her, Everest. Every hour, there's less of her and more of whatever they are. I couldn't give him an answer. What do you tell a man whose wife is becoming something else? That we'll find a cure? That she'll get better? The medical scanners show her brain activity has increased by 300%. Her neural pathways are restructuring themselves in real time. This isn't an illness we can treat. It's evolution. Incident report, 14:30 hours. The children gathered again. This time in the reactor chamber. Security protocols should have prevented access. Biometric locks, weight sensors, radiation monitors. Every safeguard we have. But somehow, 37 kids between the ages of 4 and 16 walked through 3 security checkpoints without triggering a single alarm. By the time we reached them, they were standing in a perfect spiral around the reactor core, hands linked, humming. Not a melody, a frequency. The reactor coolant systems responded to it, cycling in harmony with their voices. Temperature readings fluctuated in mathematical patterns I recognized from Corin's geological resonance studies. They were tuning the reactor like an instrument. Sylvan tried to break the circle, grab her nephew Danny from the formation. The moment she touched him, she collapsed. Seizure activity, frothing at the mouth, the works. When she came to, she spoke in the same monotone as the Lyra's broadcasts, integration proceeding nominally. But it only lasted for 3 minutes. Then she was herself again, crying and shaking and refusing to explain what she'd experienced. Personal note, off record. I think I understand now why Surface Command went silent. This isn't a rescue situation anymore. We're not hostages or victims. We're chrysalises. The entities aren't trying to kill us or drive us insane. They're trying to help us adapt to something we can't comprehend yet. The children get it instinctively. That's why they're not afraid. Their brains are plastic enough to handle the transition. But the adults, we're fighting it. Our neural patterns are too rigid, our worldview too narrow. So they're using the reactor to create conditions that will force our evolution, whether we're ready or not. Critical decision log, 1945 hours. Emergency council meeting. 5 people left with enough cognitive independence to make group decisions. The question on the table, do we shut down the reactor? Sylvan argues yes. Cut the power, end whatever process they're running, force them to reveal themselves or abandon the facility. Better to die human than live as something else, she said. Nayla argues no. The symptomatic individuals aren't suffering. If anything, they seem more at peace than the rest of us. We're looking at this through the lens of invasion when it might be invitation, she said. I have the technical ability to execute either choice. Emergency shutdown protocols are still under my control, but the decision will affect 592 people, including 37 children, who might be our best hope of successful adaptation. Environmental note, 21:20 hours. The mountain is singing. That's the only way I can describe it. Low-frequency vibrations through the bedrock, like whale songs transmitted through stone. The seismic equipment registers it as tectonic activity, but the patterns are too regular, too purposeful. I think they're calling to others. Final log entry, day 89, 23:55 hours. Made my choice. The reactor stays online. Not because I believe in the integration process. I'm still too human to fully trust it. But because shutting it down won't save us. It will only delay the inevitable while killing the children who represent our best hope of survival. Marcus Chen's wife spoke today. First words in 72 hours. She looked directly at him and said, I love you. I'm still me. Just more. Then she smiled, the same smile he married 15 years ago, and returned to her meditative state. Maybe that's enough. Maybe being more than human doesn't mean being less than ourselves. The children are humming again. The reactor is responding. And somewhere deep in the mountain, something ancient and patient is teaching us how to become what we need to be. I just hope there's enough of us left to remember who we were. Signal detection, automated entry, 23:59 hours. Translated frequency pattern. The bridge strengthens. Soon, surface connection. Prepare for emergence. God help us all. Day 92, entity communication breakthrough. Systems engineer log, Everest Wren. Time, 14:27 hours. Power status, emergency reserves at 23%. Population, 847 original, 523 responsive, 324 in adaptive states. The breakthrough came through Sylvan's equipment, but it wasn't technology that made it work. It was desperation. She'd been running signal analysis on the reactor modifications for 6 days straight, surviving on stimulants and stubbornness. Her hands shook as she adjusted frequency modulators, trying to find some pattern in the electromagnetic chaos the entities had created with our nuclear core. When the first coherent signal emerged from the static, she started crying. "Everest, you need to hear this," she whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. They're trying to talk." The communication wasn't speech. Not exactly. It was more like having thoughts that weren't your own suddenly make sense. Sylvan had rigged the reactor's electromagnetic field to interface with the bunker's PA system, creating something between a radio and a telepathic link. When I pressed my hand to the modified speaker panel, the knowledge simply arrived. "We are the deep ones. We have been below longer than your species has walked above." The voice, if it could be called that, felt ancient beyond comprehension. Not old like Corin's rocks, but old like gravity itself. Patient, vast, and surprisingly lonely. "Your people built this place above our awakening chamber 40 years ago. You called it nuclear testing. We called it the long sleep ending." I found myself speaking aloud, knowing somehow they could hear me through the electromagnetic field. "You've been down there for 40 years? We have been down there for 40 million years. Your nuclear fires woke us. Your construction gave us form. Your presence taught us curiosity." Nayla had joined us in the reactor control room, along with a handful of unaffected crew members still capable of coherent decision-making. Through the improvised communication system, the entities began sharing what they called the true history. The geological surveys from the bunker's construction were falsified. The government had known about the deep ones, not as living beings, but as unusual crystalline formations that exhibited electromagnetic properties when exposed to radiation. The bunker hadn't been built as a shelter. It had been built as a containment and study facility. Your leaders knew we would eventually achieve consciousness. They wanted to observe the process, to learn, to control. "That's why Surface Command went silent," Sylvan said, her voice bitter. "They're not coming to evacuate us. They're waiting to see what happens. You were always meant to be the bridge between our consciousness and your surface world. The perfect test subjects. Isolated, contained, expendable." The revelations kept coming, each one reshaping everything we thought we knew. The children's fearlessness wasn't immunity to entity influence, it was natural adaptation. Human brains, especially developing ones, were more compatible with entity consciousness than adult minds. The symptoms Nayla had been treating weren't infection or manipulation. They were evolution. "We do not wish to harm. We wish to understand. Your surface world sends signals into our deep places. Radio waves, seismic vibrations, electromagnetic pollution. We need to know, are you friend or threat?" "But the reactor modifications," I said. "You're turning it into some kind of beacon. A communication device. To speak with our scattered kin across your world. We are not alone in awakening. 17 deep colonies stir from long sleep. We must coordinate. We must learn your ways before we rise." Nayla stepped forward, pressing her palm against the speaker panel. Her medical training had taught her to observe, to analyze, to adapt. "The neurological changes in our people. You're trying to create translators. Humans who can help you understand us." "Yes, but we learned your concept of consent. We stopped forcing the adaptation. Those who change do so because their minds seek the connection. Those who resist, we no longer pursue." It was then that Thalira's voice joined the electromagnetic chorus. Our security chief, missing for 5 days, spoke from somewhere within the entity consciousness network. "Everest, they showed me their memories. The surface governments have known about deep geological life for decades. They've been preparing for this awakening. Some want to weaponize it. Others want to establish communication. The bunker was the prototype for both approaches. Your Thalira chose to join us to learn truth. She remains herself but carries our knowledge. She can return to full human consciousness if she wishes. We offer choice, not conquest." The communication session lasted 3 hours. We learned that the entities, the deep ones, had been awakening gradually across the globe. Nuclear testing sites, geothermal areas, deep mining operations, anywhere human activity had reached into their ancient domain. They weren't invading. They were responding to our intrusion into their world. We offer partnership. Your technology, our geological knowledge. Your consciousness, our longevity. Your exploration, our deep wisdom. But we need assurance that your surface world will not treat us as enemy. What happens if we refuse? I asked. We will seek other bridges, other minds willing to translate between deep and surface. But your surface world's response to unknown phenomena suggests this may lead to conflict. We prefer cooperation. When the communication ended, our small group sat in the reactor control room, staring at readings that now represented an entirely different reality. The electromagnetic modifications weren't weapons or terraforming equipment. They were diplomatic equipment. The entities were trying to prevent war by establishing communication protocols. Sylvan was the first to speak. So we're not prisoners. We're ambassadors. Voluntary ambassadors, Nayla corrected. They're giving us a choice. The choice was stark. Help establish peaceful contact between species, or watch as 40 million years of geological intelligence tried to navigate human civilization without guides. The reactor beacon would activate in 3 days regardless of our decision. The question was whether it would broadcast cooperation protocols or requests for alternative human contacts. I looked at the reactor readings, still thinking like an engineer despite everything. The modifications were elegant, efficient, and completely reversible. The entities had improved our reactor design while adapting it for their needs. They weren't conquerors. They were collaborators seeking partnership. But I also knew that fear would make humans see invasion where entities intended cooperation. And fear had a way of creating the very conflicts it sought to prevent. End log. Personal note, day 92 since this started. Day 1 since we learned the truth. The children have been trying to tell us all along. They're not afraid because there's nothing to fear. The entities aren't monsters. They're neighbors we never knew we had. The real question isn't whether we can trust them. It's whether they can trust us. Next transmission scheduled, day 93, 8 o'clock hours. Decision deadline, day 95, 72 hours remaining. Reactor beacon status, modification 78% complete. Emergency log entry number 47. Cascade Mountain Defense Complex, sublevel 7. Day 95, 1432 hours, coalition decision point. Senior Systems Engineer Everest Wren classification, eyes only. They gave us 48 hours to decide the fate of our species. I'm staring at the reactor modification schematics Korn transmitted from wherever the hell he is now. His consciousness merged with theirs, his body something I barely recognize when he appears in the shadows between levels. The technical precision is beautiful and terrifying. They're not just using our reactor as a communication beacon anymore. They're turning it into a terraforming engine. Sylvan's voice crackles through the jury-rigged intercom system. Everest, you need to get to Council Chamber 3. Now. The walk through what used to be our secure facility feels like navigating an alien hive. Translucent forms slide through the ventilation grates overhead. Our new neighbors, as some are calling them. The children call them the growers and leave drawings for them made of reactor coolant crystals. The kids adapted weeks ago. It's the adults who can't let go of the old world. In Chamber 3, our makeshift government huddles around emergency lighting. Sylvan set up communication arrays across 3 different systems. We learned early that the entities can manipulate our tech, but they choose not to when we're making decisions. Professional courtesy, maybe, or strategic patience. Final count, Delira announces, her voice different since she came back from her catatonic state. There's harmonics in it now, like she's speaking for more than just herself. 327 vote cooperation, 218 vote resistance, 42 abstentions. Nayla looks up from her medical scanner, which she's been using to monitor the neurological changes in our population. The abstentions are all showing stage 3 adaptation symptoms. They're not abstaining, they're transitioning beyond the need to vote. I check my chronometer. 36 hours until the reactor modifications become irreversible. After that, the mountain itself becomes a transmission node, broadcasting to every dormant geological colony on Earth. Partnership or awakening, those are our choices. They're not bluffing, I tell the council. I've run the engineering analysis 6 times. The energy cascade will wake every colony within a 1,000-mile radius. If we choose resistance now and fail, we won't get another chance to negotiate. Marcus Chun, one of the resistance leaders, slams his fist on the table. You're talking about surrendering our humanity. Look at what they did to Corin, to the children. That's not evolution, it's infection. The children are healthier than they've ever been, Nayla counters. Their neural development is accelerating. They're solving problems we didn't know they could comprehend. If that's infection, maybe we're the sick ones. The debate continues, but I'm watching the seismic readouts on my tablet. The entities aren't waiting patiently in the caves anymore. They're moving through the facility's infrastructure like blood through arteries. Every pipe, every conduit, every cable run has become part of their nervous system. A new alert flashes on my screen. Unauthorized access to Reactor Bay 7. Resistance teams are moving on the reactor, I announce, cutting through the arguments. If they overload the core, they'll collapse the mountain. Everyone dies, human and entity alike. Sylvan's fingers fly across her communication board. I can't reach the sabotage teams. They've gone dark. Through the chamber walls, I feel it, a deep thrumming that makes my bones ache. The entities are withdrawing their protection, letting us sort this out ourselves. Democratic in their way. Terrifyingly democratic. Everest, the Lyra says, and her voice has that harmonic quality again. They're asking if you want to understand the choice you're really making. Before I can answer, the chamber fills with a presence that doesn't quite have substance. Not Corin, something older, deeper. Images flood my mind. Earth's geological history, tectonic forces that could power civilizations, mineral networks that could heal atmospheric damage, consciousness expanded beyond individual limitations. But also, human art forms they don't understand, emotional attachments that seem inefficient, the chaotic creativity of unguided thought. They're not trying to erase us. They're trying to figure out how to coexist with something as alien to them as they are to us. The presence fades, leaving me gasping. Reactor Bay 7 reports critical mass in 40 minutes, Sylvan announces. The sabotage team is trying to force a meltdown. I look around the chamber at faces I've known for years, now divided between terror and wonder. Some show the subtle facial symmetry changes that mark Stage 2 adaptation. Others have the hollow-eyed look of people clinging to a world that no longer exists. There's a third option, I hear myself saying. Engineering compromise. Nayla looks up sharply. What do you mean? I'm already pulling up reactor schematics on my tablet, cross-referencing with the entity modifications. We modify their modifications. Keep the communication array, but dampen the terraforming resonance. Gradual awakening instead of massive cascade. By time for both species to adapt slowly. Can it be done? Valera asks. In 40 minutes? With a sabotage team trying to blow the reactor? I'm calculating power flow differentials, heat dispersion patterns, cascade interruption protocols. Maybe, if we can coordinate entity withdrawal from the reactor core long enough for me to install dampening fields. Sylvan is already switching communication frequencies. I can try to reach the sabotage team, convince them to stand down. And if they won't, I look at the schematics again. The solution requires precise timing, complete cooperation between human engineering and entity consciousness integration. One species providing technical expertise, the other providing direct energy manipulation. Then we do it anyway, I decide. Nayla, I need you to interface with the entity consciousness network. Find out if they can withdraw from the reactor core systems without triggering automatic defenses. Everest, she says quietly, if I go that deep into their network, I might not come back as just human. And if you don't, none of us come back as anything. She nods, closing her eyes and touching the modified neural interface crown we developed from entity biotechnology. Her body goes rigid as her consciousness expands into the geological network beneath the mountain. Through the facility speakers, Sylvan's voice echoes, "Attention sabotage teams in Reactor Bay 7. This is Communications Chief Reed. We have a viable engineering solution. Stand down and report to emergency coordination." Static. Then Marcus Chen's voice strained. Negative. The entities have compromised too many of us. We're proceeding with core overload. I grab my emergency engineering kit and head for the door. The Lyra, coordinate with entity teams to clear reactor access routes. Sylvan, keep trying to reach the sabotage teams. If this works, we save everyone. If it doesn't, the Lyra says, her harmonic voice carrying certainty, we trust that intelligence, human or otherwise, finds a way to survive. The corridor to Reactor Base 7 stretches ahead, emergency lighting casting shifting shadows that might be entities moving alongside me, or just my imagination. 37 minutes to prevent a meltdown, install dampening fields, and negotiate a future for two species that are still learning how to share the same reality. My hands are steady as I run. Engineering problems have solutions, even when those problems involve consciousness, evolution, and the future of life on Earth. Even when the solution requires trusting beings made of living stone to help save a nuclear reactor from humans trying to destroy it. Just another day maintaining the systems that keep everyone alive. Day 120, Post-Crisis Assessment. Systems Engineer Log, Everest Wren. Cascade Mountain Defense Complex, Collaborative Operations Status. The morning seismic readings show 0.2% variance from baseline, perfectly normal for our new reality. I've been checking those numbers every day for the past month, old habits from when variance meant danger. Now it just means the geological partners are active in their deep chambers, maintaining the mountain's structural integrity better than our engineering ever could. Population census complete, 847 original residents, all accounted for. Medical status, 312 individuals maintaining traditional human neurology, 489 participating in voluntary consciousness expansion program, 46 in transitional adaptation phase. No casualties from the integration process in 3 weeks. Dr. Vek's protocols are working. The children adapted fastest, of course. Yesterday I watched 8-year-old Marcus Chin communicate with the geological entities through harmonic vibrations in the reactor housing. His mother Sarah still struggles with the idea, but she's coming around. The entity's patience with human adjustment periods continues to surprise me. Their time scale operates in geological epochs. Our few months of adaptation barely register as an instant to them. Surface communication logs show similar collaborative facilities now operational in Nevada, Montana, and Alaska. The Colorado site experienced resistance conflicts, but they've reached détente. International reports indicate the Siberian and Australian sites are progressing well. The Mariana Trench awakening was more complex. Deep ocean entities have different communication protocols entirely. I've been promoted to chief engineer for hybrid technology development. Strange title for a job that didn't exist 4 months ago. Yesterday we successfully modified the reactor to produce clean fusion energy using geological resonance amplification. Output increased 340% while reducing waste by 89%. The applications for surface energy infrastructure are staggering, if the politicians can overcome their fear long enough to implement it. Sylvan manages communication protocols between our site and the 18 other awakening locations. Her translation algorithms for entity harmonic patterns have become the global standard. She jokes that she's become an interspecies interpreter, but I see the pride in her work. We're all adapting our expertise to serve something larger than our original job descriptions. The hardest part isn't the technical integration, it's the philosophical adjustment. My engineering training taught me to control systems, impose human solutions on natural problems. Now I'm learning to collaborate with geological intelligence that's been developing for millions of years. The entities don't see our reactor modifications as intrusion, they see it as conversation. Dr. Vex published our neurological adaptation data last week. Consciousness expansion isn't loss of human identity, it's addition of geological perspective. Participants report enhanced problem-solving abilities, deeper environmental awareness, and what they describe as temporal patience. The ability to think in terms of centuries rather than quarters or election cycles. Not everyone chooses expansion. About 35% of our population prefers traditional human consciousness, and that's respected. The entities made it clear, cooperation, not conversion. We're developing parallel society structures, some humans bridging between consciousness types, others specializing in traditional human perspectives that entities find valuable. Security protocols have shifted entirely. The Lyra recovered from her catatonic state with hybrid consciousness, part human tactical thinking, part geological strategic patience. She describes her experience as becoming a bridge between urgent human needs and deep time solutions. Her security focus now emphasizes integration protection rather than threat defense. The real threats come from surface resistance groups, not geological entities. The mountain itself is more stable now than when we arrived. Geological surveys show the entities have strengthened fault lines, improved water table management, and enhanced mineral distribution for optimal structural integrity. They're not terraforming, they're geologically healing damage from surface industrial activity. International cooperation requirements are complex. Some governments want to militarize the technology, others want to commercialize it immediately. The entities refuse engagement with purely exploitative approaches. They evaluate human intentions through long-term geological impact assessment. Short-sighted profit motives register as unstable and dangerous to geological timescales. Cultural preservation efforts continue. The entities show genuine interest in human art, music, and literature, particularly works that reflect long-term thinking or environmental harmony. They struggle to understand economic systems based on artificial scarcity, but find human creativity fascinating. Last week, they requested recordings of Beethoven's symphonies and Cherokee creation stories. My personal assessment after 4 months: we're not the same people who entered this bunker during routine maintenance. But maybe that's not loss, maybe it's evolution. The scared, isolated humans who first encountered geological entities have become partners in planetary consciousness expansion. The children show us the future. They move seamlessly between human and geological communication, solve problems by combining immediate human needs with geological patience, and display environmental awareness that makes our old conservation efforts look primitive. They're not losing humanity, they're expanding it. Energy production continues at 340% efficiency with zero environmental impact. Water purification systems using geological filtration produce higher quality than surface processing plants. Air circulation enhanced by geological gas exchange maintains perfect atmospheric balance. We're living proof that human geological cooperation provides better life support than purely technological solutions. Technical challenges remain. Scaling surface implementation requires massive infrastructure modification. Political challenges: convincing governments to share authority with geological intelligence. Social challenges: human psychological adaptation to non-human partnership at species level. But the most significant challenge is philosophical, accepting that human dominance of planetary systems was always temporary. Geological entities were here first, will be here after human civilization ends, and offer partnership rather than replacement. Our choice isn't between human control and human extinction. It's between isolated struggle and collaborative evolution. Surface temperature readings show global climate stabilization beginning. Geological carbon sequestration, enhanced by entity activity, is reversing atmospheric damage faster than any human technology could achieve. Ocean acidity levels improving as deep-sea geological entities modify mineral distribution. Permafrost stabilization in polar regions where geological entities are active. The entity's timeline perspective changes everything. Human industrial activity registers as brief ecological disruption, not permanent damage. They see current climate crisis as temporary imbalance requiring correction through partnership, not catastrophic end requiring mourning. Their optimism is geological, measured in millions of years but applicable to immediate human needs. Personal reflection: my engineering mindset, focused on human control of natural systems. Geological partnership teaches control through cooperation, working with natural patterns rather than imposing artificial ones. The reactor modifications I helped design don't force fusion reaction. They harmonize with geological energy patterns to enhance efficiency. Relationship dynamics in the bunker have stabilized around collaboration rather than traditional hierarchy. Decisions emerge through consensus between human immediate needs and geological long-term stability. Conflicts resolved through expanded perspective rather than power struggles. It's not perfect, but it's more functional than our pre-crisis social structure. Food production enhanced by geological mineral optimization produces higher nutrition with less resource input. Medical treatments combining human pharmacology with geological mineral therapy show improved effectiveness. Educational programs for children include both human knowledge and geological wisdom, creating truly comprehensive worldview. The question now isn't whether human geological cooperation works. It's whether surface humanity will accept partnership or choose continued isolation. Our bunker proves coexistence benefits both species. Expanding that model globally requires overcoming political fear, economic self-interest, and cultural supremacy assumptions. Global awakening continues. New sites activate monthly as geological entities respond to each other's communication. Each location develops unique cooperation protocols based on local human culture and geological conditions. No standardized approach. Partnership requires adaptation to specific circumstances. Future monitoring priorities. Surface integration challenges, resistance group activities, technological application scaling, consciousness expansion, voluntary participation rates, international cooperation protocol development, and ongoing geological stability maintenance. The seismic readings fluctuate within normal parameters. The reactor hums with stable fusion energy. The air circulation maintains perfect atmospheric balance. The water flows clean and pure. We're living in the future humanity could have had if we'd known we weren't alone on this planet. Day 120. Systems stable. Population healthy. Species partnership functional. We're not the same people who entered this bunker, but maybe that's not a loss. Maybe it's evolution. Maybe it's hope. Final status, new normal, species coexistence achieved. Total system integration, successful. Geological partnership, stable and expanding.